At a private donor retreat, Donald Trump's campaign says Minnesota and Virginia are in play. What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Real American, back again with a new video, and today it is time to talk about the 2024 presidential election because it appears that the Trump campaign is getting even more confident about the 2024 election as they announce at a private donor retreat that Minnesota and Virginia, two states that Biden won by a lot in 2020, mind you, are in play. Now, to be clear, they're not saying that 100% they're gonna win these two states. In fact, it still seems very unlikely for this to occur. But it appears that, at least according to internals, they have a legitimate shot at both of these states. Now, before we continue with today's video, I hope you enjoy these type of videos. If you do, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, follow the social media accounts in the description down below, and of course, join the channel today. Again, folks, all support is greatly appreciated, and yeah. Now, let us get into it. Top officials for former President Trump's campaign believes they can flip Democratic strongholds Minnesota and Virginia into his column in November. They told donors behind closed doors at a Republican National Committee retreat on Saturday. You heard that right. This isn't, well, an anonymous source told an anonymous source that, well, 5 months ago, the Trump campaign had a poll that shows them up. No, this is recent. This is yesterday. This is a retreat they had, and they believe they have a shot at Minnesota and Virginia. That doesn't mean they're going to win these two states. That's the one thing people got to take away from this right off the bat. This is not a 100% guarantee to win either of them. I mean, for crying out loud, Virginia went for Biden by like 10 points, Minnesota by 7. In other words, it is very unlikely they flip both of them, let alone one of them. But apparently, and we've seen this even with public polling, it appears that at the bare minimum, Trump is doing significantly better in both of these states. British and internal surveys, pollsters Tony Fabrizio and senior advisor Susie Wiles and Chris Lachiva delivered a set of presentations that focus on finances, messaging, and the political map. According to two people who were present at the Four Seasons Resort here, Fabrizio's numbers, posted on a slide share with NBC News, showed Trump ahead of President Biden by small margins in the key swing states from 2020, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. So they pulled everything. This wasn't, a one-time pull out of Virginia and that's it. No. They pulled everything. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc. But they decided to throw in Virginia and Minnesota. The Trump camp's discussion of expanding the electoral map deeper into the Democratic territory of Minnesota and Virginia comes as Biden's re-election team says it is eyeing North Carolina, which Republicans have won in 3 consecutive presidential races, and Florida, where the GOP has prevailed in the last 2 presidential elections. Biden took the 2020 contest by a margin of 74 electoral votes, with victories in the pivotal states of Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia coming from an advantage of about 44,000 votes. Now, Florida's just gone for Democrats. That's obviously a fundraising scam. That they're saying publicly, we're going to win Florida, we're going to win North Carolina. And that's the big difference between what's happening here and what's the Biden campaign's doing with Florida and North Carolina. They're announcing to the world, we're going to shock the world in Florida. Here, yes, this got to the press, but they're talking behind closed doors. They're actually having serious discussions about trying to put Minnesota and Virginia into play. Which, according to the polling, publicly, not even the internals, there's a legitimate chance Trump can win one of them. It's not likely, but there still is that legitimate possibility. It's not like Florida where Republicans gain 100,000 new voters each month. North Carolina, it seems like that's what's happening there as well. And the polling in both of the states are just terrible for Democrats. I mean, Biden's down by 15 points in Florida and down by 5 or 6 in North Carolina? That's the big difference. We have public data to indicate Florida, North Carolina, they're going to go to Trump more than likely. I would say Florida's a foregone conclusion that it's going to go for Trump no matter what. North Carolina might be a little bit closer than the polls indicate, maybe. But even then, Trump is going to win these two states pretty convincingly. But Virginia and Minnesota, at least according to public polling, not including the internals they showed at this retreat, they have Trump within the margin of error in both states. That's not the same thing as North Carolina, Florida, where Trump's winning, but it's outside of the margin of error. I think that the Biden campaign is deliberately playing a faux game by talking about how they're going to expand the map in Florida and North Carolina. But we have a real opportunity in expanding the map in Virginia and Minnesota. Now, I still think it's very unlikely for Trump to win Virginia and Minnesota. And same thing for the Biden campaign to win Florida and North Carolina. But at the bare minimum, at least you could say with Virginia and Minnesota that the polls we have gotten from the states are very good for Trump. Not the same thing for Florida and North Carolina. The top lines of the internal polling shared with donors are relatively consistent with sparse public surveys that show Biden with a small edge in Virginia, while Trump's advantage in his own polling in Minnesota is at odds with a few public surveys in the state. But all the public polls in Minnesota and Virginia, and the trials run by the Trump campaign, fall within their margins of error, suggesting tight races in both states. So this isn't like, an accidental leak in quotation from the campaign where, oh, the public polls have us down by 15 in Minnesota, but we're actually winning by 5. That's a push poll. That's bullshit when you do stuff like that. It appears, according to this article from NBC News, the internal polls are nearly identical to the public polling. Now, does that mean everything? Not necessarily, because internals can be kind of wacky and they could be bullshit, especially if you're trying to fundraise. But the fact that they're nearly identical to the public polling shows that there might be some legitimacy here of, hey, maybe Trump is doing a lot better in Minnesota and in Virginia, which makes sense when you factor in Trump is doing what, 5-6 points better at the national level? That should mean he does way better in Virginia and Minnesota. And that's another problem for Biden. If he's doing 5 or 6 points worse everywhere, how the hell is he going to do 10 points better in North Carolina or something? That's not going to happen. Trump's team tested head-to-head 4-way and 6-way races in each state. In the 6-way trial in Minnesota, which includes 4 independent candidates, Trump and Biden were tied at 40 apiece, with RFK at 9%, he said. When the field was narrowed to 4 candidates, Trump led Biden 46% to 41%. In a head-to-head matchup, Trump led Biden 49% to 46%. Now, I'm a bit skeptical of him leading, and that's why I'm saying the internals, they might be overstating Trump just a little bit. But even then, that's not that far off from the polls that we have gotten publicly where, yeah, Biden's leading, but it's not by 7 points like he won it by in 2020. It's by 1 to 2 points, maybe 3. And fascinatingly, Trump is doing worse with independents. And for those that don't know, Republicans can win Minnesota. It just comes down to independent candidates. For whatever reason, it really doesn't matter what independent you run. In the state of Minnesota, independents hurt Democrats all the frickin' time. That's why the rare circumstances where Republicans won a statewide race in Minnesota in the past, 50 years? It usually involved a third-party candidate running and getting a decent chunk of the vote. But here, when you include third-party candidates, at least when you include RFK, Trump is tied with Biden. But in a head-to-head matchup, Trump's up by 3. It's very bizarre, but at the same time, with how crazy this election is gonna be, I guess it's possible that maybe Biden is doing so bad in Minnesota that there's literally no one else he can lose at this point because he's lost basically every single one of his supporters that he can realistically lose. Maybe that's what's occurring here. But even then, Trump is either tied or slightly ahead according to this internal poll. Biden won Minnesota by about 7 points in 2020, and the state has not favored a Republican nominee for president since Richard Nixon's 1972 re-election campaign, and that should tell you everything about Minnesota. It voted against Reagan in 1984, for crying out loud. This is a state that will not vote Republican at the presidential level for whatever reason, and this has to do with the fact that you have the Twin Cities. It's just not going to vote Republican, or at least it wasn't. But it appears the Republicans have a legitimate shot in the state this year, at least a better shot than 2020. In Virginia, Trump's internal survey showed Biden leading Trump 40% to 37% in a six-way test that included Kennedy at 8%. Biden led Trump 48% to 44% in a head-to-head matchup, and in a four-way race, Biden had a 42% to 41% advantage over Trump. In other words, when you include independents in Virginia, it does hurt Biden way more. But oddly enough, it doesn't hurt him in Minnesota. That's a one part of this survey that I have some questions about, but maybe it's because we have not seen an RFK type in decades. You know, someone that's going to get more than 2% of the vote. Is someone that's going to probably get, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even crack 10% of the vote. It's possible. But either way, the fact that this internal shows the polling is nearly identical to the public surveys should tell you this isn't, a push poll. At the bare minimum, there is some legitimacy to this polling. Now, does that mean Trump's going to win either state? No. It's still very questionable about Trump winning a state that hasn't voted Republican in what? 40 years? Or no, at this point, 52 years. Yeah, 1972 was the last time Republicans won Minnesota. Virginia, you won it back in 2004 with Bush. But either way, the fact that the internals have Biden doing bad in Minnesota and Virginia, that's not good for his campaign. And it lines up perfectly with what we're seeing with every other pollster, not just the internals. Public polls in both states and even at the national level show Biden has big problems in many states. But either way, we just got to see what happens. It is going to be fascinating to see. Will the Trump campaign invest a lot into Minnesota and Virginia? Because if they do, this might not just be a smokescreen. This may not be complete bullshit. Anyways, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy this video, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, follow the social media accounts in the description down below, and of course, join the channel today. Godspeed to all of you.